Laura's conversation about air quality regulations in Albuquerque is coming up in about 15 minutes. Right now, I am joined by Diane Layden. Diane, we've been talking over email and otherwise about policing and police accountability for many years, and I am thrilled to have you on New Mexico in Focus. Thank you for coming.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
We've just spent a bit here at the table talking with Matt Risen about this case involving, potentially implicating Manny Gonzalez and Rudy Mora, involving a multi-state machine gun scheme, as the federal government describes it. But what I would like to talk to you about are the systems in which this took place. You have been observing Bernalillo County sheriffs and other aspects of county government in various capacities of your own since long before you and I met. What have been some of the highlights, lowlights, and themes that have emerged in the last 40 or 50 years that you've watched this?
I worked for Bernalillo County in the mid-1970s. I was hired in the personnel department and became the personnel director, and then became an assistant county manager for labor relations when the county unionized, and the sheriff's department was the first department that did. There have always been questions about the county working with its independent elected officials, and some of those officials have been more independent than others. Sheriffs notoriously are independent in New Mexico. And Sheriff Manny Gonzalez claimed that New Mexico sheriffs have unlimited powers. This isn't accurate. The county has budget authority and ordinance-making power, and the state government regulates, local governments. But with that viewpoint, Sheriff Gonzalez was able, for example, to refuse to discuss ever body cameras with the county commission, although the commission had brought forth the money to buy body cameras. So it took a state law to be passed in June 2020 for Bernalillo County to have body cameras when APD has had them since 2012. In terms of other events over the many years, Sheriff Joe Wilson in the mid-1970s was removed from office for backdating a memo authorizing county cars to go to the racetrack. And I believe two of his employees, his chief deputy and undersheriff, spent some time in prison over this matter. So there have been ups and downs with independent elected officials, and not only the sheriff, but sometimes the treasurer or the assessor.
We'll get to those other positions in a moment too, but you've mentioned the word elected a couple of times in sort of the early part of our conversation here. What are some of the other challenges from an accountability and transparency perspective that nature of the office, these are elected positions, not appointed positions, what other challenges has that presented for county government?
Okay. The sheriff, for example, is mentioned in the state constitution in terms of his or her duties. The county commission doesn't have everyday authority over these officials. Yes, they're subject to county ordinances, but the commission doesn't know what's going on in county offices. And that's how these letters could have been written by Sheriff Gonzalez and Under Sheriff Mora without anybody knowing about them. And there wasn't a dialogue. There is no legal oversight required of the sheriff.
He doesn't answer to the commission, right?
Officially, he does not answer to the commission.
So they do it a little different in the city of Albuquerque, Diane, on the law enforcement side. The police chief is appointed by the mayor, hireable and fireable by the mayor. As we've just discussed, the sheriff is an elected position. Are we looking there at sort of the two edges of the proverbial democracy sword?
Of course, the performance of the sheriff depends on the quality of the sheriff who is elected. Certain sheriffs could, of course, have warm relations with the county commissioners. And I believe that relationship may exist now. between Sheriff Allen and the county commission. That's my impression as an outsider observer. I think state law would have to be changed for sheriffs to have more accountability. Currently, they can sign contracts without a legal review by the county commission staff, by the attorneys that work for Bernalillo County. I know this. This came up when the On Patrol program became controversial. That was a TV program in which law enforcement officers followed Bernalillo County deputies. And they stopped a woman after she had had a car accident. She came to the sheriff's board with her story, with her boyfriend and her mother. She had been placed on national TV without her consent. It was at those meetings I discovered that the sheriff could sign a contract with the TV program and there was no legal review required. Now, he could request a legal review, but he didn't have to. So the sheriff has great autonomy at Bernalillo County and apparently throughout New Mexico.
And throughout the nation, too. You mentioned earlier that notion of ultimate authority. Manny is sort of aligned with what a lot of people refer to, and they refer to themselves, as the so-called constitutional sheriff's movement. What kinds of challenges does that present in terms of systems of government working together?
Okay, the constitutional sheriff's movement believes in no power higher than the county, really. There's actually a group called Posse Comitatus, which means power of the county. It's a right-wing group. The sheriff's constitutional movement doesn't believe in the authority of governors or the federal government. It believes in its own authority. And so we saw that Sheriff Gonzalez did not completely comply with Governor Lujan Grisham's public health orders, the mask mandates, and the vaccines. How do we change that? I want to mention that in Texas, I've been told that in Texas sheriffs do not have contractual authority. One of the members of the sheriff's board, Jim Stewart, was a sheriff in Texas, and he said sheriffs there don't have that authority. He was surprised that New Mexico sheriffs had contractual authority. So this is one area we could look at for greater accountability.
I want to talk some more about the board in a moment, but one more question sort of on the systemic bit that we've been discussing here. When you see something like this story that's broken in the last month, where the top elected law enforcement official in our county and his number 2 guy are alleged to have been involved in a big multi-state machine gun scheme, in particular in the middle of what's been going on in our community. We've had tons of residents and an increasing number of residents die and be wounded by bullets here. There's a gun violence epidemic in our community. Mm-hmm. So when people see this, something like this, what does this do to faith in government institutions and leaders for the public, especially at a time when that kind of faith is already sort of waning?
Well, now this certainly undermines faith in the sheriff's office and local government, although perhaps not in this sheriff who is looking into this matter. To have written letters to obtain guns that people then could sell to collectors and others who want to get a hold of machine guns and short barrel rifles, to do that. Now, Matt Risen's article said that they don't know if Sheriff Gonzalez benefited from this arrangement, and that's something we still need to find out. And that may be a reason why he wasn't charged in this indictment but was named. We don't know. We don't know the degree of his culpability, if any.
And those kinds of questions leave doubt for the public too, right?
But why the sheriff would do it, why his undersheriff would do it, that's the question. Why would they go to this trouble to write these letters, to obtain these guns? For other people, apparently, for collectors and gun dealers and so on, at a time when guns are a major political issue and public safety issue throughout our country, and especially here in Albuquerque.
So Diane, I want to go to a paper that you prepared for the Historical Society of New Mexico about the formation, the God particle, if you will, of the Sheriff's Office Advisory Review Board. It sounds like Manny's tenure in office was a big catalyst for the creation of that board. Tell me some about that board, on which you sit, of course, and how it functions.
Okay. I was appointed in 2021. The board was formed in September 2020 by the County Commission. The ordinance creating the board was written by James Colley, who was a member of the County Commission for 1 year. He stepped in to complete the term of Maggie Hart Stebbins, who left the County Commission for a state government position. I interviewed Jim Colley. I also interviewed Maggie. Jim told me that when he joined the commission, that's all other commissioners talked about, is what to do about the sheriff.
And that frustration you mentioned before.
A particular concern was the body cameras and the inability of the commission to get the sheriff to adopt body cameras. I wish to say for myself, I met a sheriff's deputy where I live with his gun at the ready. He was chasing a suspect. And this was back before body cameras. And I ended up writing 3 letters to the Journal about this. Albuquerque police carry body cameras and have for years, but there's a sheriff's deputy in my neighborhood looking for a suspect with his gun at the ready, and there's going to be no record of what took place.
So we've talked some today about the sort of struggle for accountability and oversight. I know that neither of those words is in the title of the board you sit on, but how is it supposed to function? What is its relationship to the Sheriff's Department? And what are some of its limitations?
The name of the board is the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office Advisory and Review Board. We are not an oversight board. This issue arose when the ordinance was written. This ordinance isn't like the initial civilian police oversight authority that was set up at the city, which was oversight, and they were reviewing disciplinary cases. We don't do that. We are intended to provide access to the public to come to the board and bring their issues to us, and they have. I mentioned the on-patrol case. Also, the sister of Elisha Lucero, Elaine Maestas, came to the board about the killing of her sister by sheriff's deputies. The family had called the sheriff's office for help. The sister is mentally ill. She allegedly came out with a knife, and they killed her with 21 bullets. Now, this was an expensive lawsuit and is one of the reasons the sheriff's board was formed. This lawsuit and another lawsuit involving the killing of another man in a truck. He was an innocent person, but he was in a truck that was being pursued by sheriff's deputies. Those 2 cases, I believe, cost the county about $7 million. So in terms of the formation of the sheriff's board, there was concern about the lawsuits as well as the absence of body cameras and the unwillingness of the sheriff to even discuss that subject.
Did Manny participate with the board? Did he allow that board to advise and review his department?
I missed much of the first year. The board started meeting in November 2020. I joined in June. But I've been told that Manny never came to a sheriff's board meeting. His undersheriff, Larry Corrin, and a couple of other of his leading people did come to sheriff's board meetings. We did have a presentation on how the county sheriff's office protects the schools. Okay. The current sheriff has been more open with our board and has sent more of his people to meet with us.
That sounds like a step in the right direction.
We think so.
Diane, thank you so much for coming in and helping us understand the context for what this is taking place.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.